On this edition of Forever Home, we're going to be talking a little bit more serious about that beautiful house that you and your spouse have put together, and your forever home is exactly everything that you wanted it to be. But what happens if one of you suddenly isn't here anymore? And the delegation of responsibility and how you guys have worked together to build that home, and now what's going to happen? So on this edition of Forever Home, we're going to be introducing you to a community leader who's been in Kennett Square area for the last 7 or 8 years, is a spiritual formation catalyst, and we're going to be talking through this, what can be a rather difficult concept to get your head around, but it's a lot easier to do it before something catastrophic happens than after. I want to introduce you to Dan Nicewonger. Dan, thanks for being with us on the podcast today and on the YouTube show here. You've written a new book, Caring Conversations. After you had a little bit of a challenge yourself with your family, where you and your wife have built your family, your forever home, and all of a sudden you got some news. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, we had actually just moved into what we believed was going to be our forever home. Actually is our forever home. And we had been there for probably less than a year. And then I got the diagnosis of stage 4 colon cancer. And that was not something that either of us anticipated, and it certainly was a disruption into our world.
And that was several years ago now. This wasn't a recent thing.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was in 2016. I got that diagnosis. Yeah, Drew. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so in the process of getting that diagnosis, your world is rocked. You know, you're trying to figure out which end is up. Your wife's trying to figure out which end is up. But the way you were telling the story, the two of you viewed that situation in very different perspectives. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we were in the hospital room. We were probably 4 feet apart when we first heard the word stage 4 colon cancer. And my immediate perspective is I start to wrestle with my own mortality. Start to wrestle with feelings of how can I best prepare my family to navigate life after I'm no longer here. And at the same time, my wife is her perspective is, my gosh, I'm 48 years old, and the doctors just told me that in 2 years my husband's not going to be here, and I'm going to be left alone, and that was just the first of many times that we've navigated these past 7 years with just very, very different perspectives about a very closely shared journey. I mean, she's my caregiver. We do all of this together, and I couldn't do it without her. But the truth is we experience things very differently.
Absolutely. And the phrase comes to mind, I think I heard this in college somewhere, men's minds are like waffles, women's minds are like spaghetti. Men, we compartmentalize every little thing, and for women, everything touches everything else.
Everything else.
And that's very unique. So let's just jump straight to the purpose and the point of the book. As we have just hundreds of clients, thousands of clients over the years who have called our number, who have reached out to us and that we've done repairs and work for, who are in the process of what you and Nancy did, building your forever home, and getting that to the point where you guys really enjoy that space together. You have put together a tremendous resource here to sort of help prep for what happens when you get one of those disruptions that occurs in life. Tell us how someone, a happy couple, 28 to 45 years old, 2 kids, living their best life, why do they want to take a look at this book now?
Because I think it's because, listen, disruptions happen all the time. They come in so many different shapes and sizes and forms. For Nancy and myself, it was a diagnosis. It was a health issue. Sometimes it's the loss of a job. Sometimes it's the loss of a loved one. We could spend hours talking about the many different shapes and sizes of the disruptions that come into our lives. The one thing that we know for sure is that no matter how good life may be right now, there is going to come a time when our life is going to get disrupted and it's going to get turned upside down. For Nancy and myself, what we found was that all of a sudden we were having conversations, very, very deep conversations about quality and quantity of life and healthcare, and is Nancy going to be able to live in the house by herself after I'm gone? Just all kinds of those kind of deep conversations, like we used to plan a vacation, and it was frankly, it was overwhelming. And we were looking for a resource and we couldn't find one. And so, I jokingly said, yeah, maybe we ought to write it. And that's where we ended up. And what really makes this a good resource is the people who came alongside us and helped us write it. I had my lawyer as a part of it, my financial planner, my friend who's a funeral director is a part of it. There's a couple people who are grief experts who are a part of it. My daughter, who was 16 at the time I was diagnosed, she shares a chapter. There's a few others who join in as well, and each person shares their expertise that talks about when disruptions happen. These are the things that we ought to have in place, and these are the kind of conversations that we ought to have to help navigate them well. And the truth is that these conversations are probably best had before the disruption. And for example, I went to meet with our lawyer post-diagnosis and said, hey, what kind of things do you think we ought to have in place? And the truth was that Nancy and I had about 50% of it in place. And then we had to be going about the work of getting the other 50% in place while I was going through treatment, while I was going through all this diagnosis stuff. And it would have been easier if that wasn't reality.
If you'd had that worked out ahead of time.
And it would have been so easy to do it ahead of time.
Right.
But we were living like so many of us do, thinking, yeah, life is great, we're young, nothing's gonna happen, the disruption is not gonna happen to us, that happens to other people. And then all of a sudden, yeah, the disruption happened to me.
Right.
And so I think it's a great resource for people who may not be experiencing a disruption right now. Mm-hmm. Be prepared for it.
Right.
But then especially for those who may find themselves in the midst of a disruption and be searching for the kind of conversations you ought to have. And I think one of the things that's important is, Nancy and I share a little bit of our story. We allow some of the experts to share their wisdom. And then what we do at the close of each chapter is we provide questions. We bullet point questions.
It's almost like a checklist.
It is like a checklist, yeah. And we did it that way because our answers are not going to be your answers. I can't answer these questions for you, but what I can do is I can tell you, listen, these are at least some of the questions you ought to be asking yourself and ought to be wrestling with, with your loved ones, so that you can navigate a season of disruption well.
And if you're in, I'll say midlife, in that 40s to 65 age bracket, maybe you're already starting to think about some of these conversations, or maybe you've had a parent who is having some health challenges or has been put in a nursing home or has passed, and it's forced you to start to think about some of these things. But I know especially the younger couples that we work with, this isn't even on their radar. Yep. And it's really good. Sure, the plans could change. And if your disruption is a loss of a job versus your disruption is a health emergency, maybe, the responses will be a little bit different. But if there's a plan in place, we can modify it.
You can modify it.
We can tweak it.
Exactly.
If you have nothing and you're starting from scratch and you don't even have the checklist that Dan and Nancy provide in this, it's much more of an uphill battle, which is kind of what you guys experienced because you didn't have one in place.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we talk about in here is when Nancy and I got married in our 20s, and we were standing in front of all of our family and loved ones and announcing our love and getting married and all this, like the furthest thing from our mind is, oh yeah, here's this disruption that's going to come down the road, and that's just kind of the way we move through life, and that doesn't mean we need to be scared every day that the disruption's coming now, but boy, if we take a few steps to be prepared, we will be better for it. Our families will be better for it. Our children will be better for it. It'll make our quality of life better in the midst of the disruption, whatever it happens to be.
And it doesn't have to be a sad, morose conversation. This can be an upbeat, very positive experience.
It can be. Yep.
I know that my parents just went through, they had done a will, And I've graduated college and gotten a job, and their will was never updated, and it still said that I was going to go live with my uncle.
Yeah.
So sometimes these things need to be updated and revised.
That's it, exactly.
And so they went through that process, and they had a couple of different professionals help walk them through it. And then mom and dad coming to my brother and I and talking with us about what they had put together and what they were thinking, and asking us some things about, well, how do you want us to handle certain pieces of this? And would you be interested in taking over this responsibility? And I mean, you're even talking about planning the funeral, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. They can read the book. That's what it's here for. But I think it's important to have a plan, and as much time as we put into designing your master kitchen exactly the way you want it, or the master suite the way you want it, your new kitchen the way you want it, as much time as I know Tracy and I spend planning our vacations and putting into what we want to have happen and where we want to be and where we're going to stay and how we're going to get there, and all of those nuances and details, and even with your home, preparing for possible emergencies. We talk with insurance agents, and we talk with preparing for what happens if, and what are the perils that your home is covered for. This is one area that I think is very underserved, that we don't spend a lot of time prepping. If you're newly married or have been married with kids for a long time, no one wants to talk about this part. But what if there was a way that you could have the conversation in a healthy, way that was positive, that was uplifting, that was, as us men, we think about, okay, well, I got to take care of X, Y, and Z. And for women, sometimes it's more about, the perspective is more about, oh my gosh, how am I going to do life without? And reconciling those two conversations, and whatever it is for your family, your dialogue might be different than the way I think or the way Dan thinks, but it's important to have the conversation, and to you may think you know what your spouse would want, but maybe they don't. Simple things like, where's the will? Do you guys have your passwords laid out? Like, there's different things in here that most of us never think about until the oh crap moment happens. And as much as we want to see you have that forever home that you've really dreamed about, we also want to make sure that if a disruption happens, that you don't lose everything that the two of you have built for each other and your family. Anything else you want to add as we wrap this up?
As you were talking, I think one of the things I would say is that, when you try to have these conversations in the midst of a disruption, it's possible. It can be done. Nancy and I were able to do it, and we continue to do it as I continue to go through treatment. It would be easier and less stressful if you did it before the disruption happened, because you could take your time a little bit, and some of the conversations may become difficult, they may become awkward, and you may want to talk for a while and then step aside and not talk about something for a week. And then revisit it again, a week later, and work your way through it. And if you're talking about it before the disruption happens, you have the freedom to do that. Once the disruption happens, that freedom is often gone, and you have got to plow through these questions in order to navigate it safely and to navigate it well. And so I guess that's one last thing I would say, that
because there's two other factors that happen to that point. Now you're on a time constraint. Right? We have to make treatment decisions. We have to make whatever it might be, financial decisions. And you've now layered in this unavoidable layer thickness of emotional content.
Exactly.
And while there's emotions talking about end-of-life things in different pieces, when it's more pressing or it's more imminent, that layer gets a lot thicker, and it's harder to make really good decisions. It is when you've added this entire layer of emotion on top of it.
Exactly. That's it.
So I hope this is helpful. If you guys are looking for this is available on Amazon.
You can find that on Amazon. Search my name, Daniel Nicewonger, on Amazon, and it will certainly pop up.
Okay. Caring conversations, uncomfortable but essential questions to help you navigate life's biggest disruptions, and we'll get a link to that in the description or the comments of this video, somewhere up, down, below, over, wherever. And of course, you can reach out to Dan. His contact information will be in the description as well. And if you know somebody, so this video primarily we're talking to families who are dealing with this, but if you know someone who is a professional who deals with funeral arrangements, grief counseling, hospice care, anything along those other list of services, estate and trust attorneys, where each one of those specialists has a unique niche that they work in, but this book really helps broaden that conversation to the other arenas outside, and they may find this a really great resource for their clients, and maybe you could share this video with them or tag them down below. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Forever Home. If we can solve a problem for you, reach out to our team here on Facebook. You guys know how to get hold of us. Thanks so much. Talk to you guys soon. Bye for now.